Welcome to the first meeting of the Research and Learning Guild of the Lifeboat Academy, aka the Curiosity Club. And today is March 14th. And as is our custom, we start with the land acknowledgement. And would anyone like to try Pam? Yay!
I should maybe ask for the recording to be turned off. I'm going to try talk this one. Um, okay. I want to acknowledge that I'm on the watershed of Boca Creek and that this is a Gary Oak meadow ecosystem that has been husbanded for millennia by First Nations people up until the arrival of the traders who, when they came to the land, thought that it was as though it was by design. It was so beautiful. Our watershed is degraded. The water is unpotable. No salmon swim there. We have done harms, and I acknowledge that we have done harms. The people have been shunted off the land, as have the animals and the creatures. And I just acknowledge that their absence is very present. In order to be accountable for our actions, it's necessary both to make that acknowledgement and to work to right those wrongs by having good relations with the people who've lived here on their terms. If they want to be with us as kin and neighbor, that is a welcome association. And whatever we can do to try to restore ecosystem functioning, biodiversity, all of that good stuff to this area is probably the most articulate way for us to express our sincerity in terms of any kind of reconciliation with teeth in it. So with gratitude for the abundance that we had and the energy that still exists to acknowledge and restore that as best we can, and restoring better relations with each other while we do that. That's
I think that was fantastic. So with that, I invite us into a moment of grounding and taking the time so that we can enter into this space together with each other. So I invite you to just pause, take a moment, feel the weight of your body pressing down into the seat. Take the time to be aware of your breath, which is always with you, whether you notice it or not. And take a few on your own time as it feels good. Few breaths in, allowing fresh oxygen to enter your system, energize you. And to exhale, letting go of carbon dioxide and anything that you no longer need. And to the extent possible, just let go of anything that keeps you from being present, from having your attention here with each of us. And take one more deep, energizing breath in and a relaxing exhale out, and then join us back in the circle when you are ready. All right. I am especially aware of how valuable the grounding is when I've had a lot of meetings. So let's do, I'm going to do sort of a practical check-in. So a little chance to land, and also just to say, what are you curious about in the Curiosity Club? Why are you here, and what's intriguing you? And the circle as I see it is Pamela, Roland, and me. And you can always pass if you're not ready when we come to you, and we'll come back to you. So Pamela, over to you. How are you doing, and what are you curious about?
I'm going to pass to Roland.
I'm doing fine because I just discovered the hotkey for muting and unmuting on my keyboard, and that makes me very happy. Which is Alt A, by the way. Um, and uh, and I know that this is the Education and Learning Guild, and I will be referring to it as the Curiosity Club because that is less of a mouthful and more fun to say. And I also think that it's descriptive. Um, and in that spirit, I feel like uh, although there is always overlap between any of the guilds, for me, there is a closer overlap between the Curiosity Guild and the Heartwork Guild in terms of the philosophy part. And so this feels like a very natural, um, um, they are complementary, and it feels very natural to be in this guild for that reason. And there's also something, you know, I have I've thought of the Curiosity Guild or the Curiosity Club as being where the research project lives. And in my mind, the research project is related to hard work, but is sort of the doing of it. Hard work is more the thinking, and the Curiosity Guild is bringing the thinking into the doing. But over to you, Ben.
Thank you for the hotkey. I really like that, and I like that it does the little chime on mine at least. So I am at the end of a long week, and the sun is out, so I am tired and energized at the same time, and really looking forward to a couple of days without meetings. And um, what am I am curious to see where this will go, in part. When we originally established the guilds, this first incarnation was governance and principles, I think. And uh, and and we thought that it would be all about sociocracy and sort of implementing how we do sociocracy. And there wasn't any uptake on that, and whatever implementation was basically just kind of happened through the how the other guilds actually did the work. And then there seemed to be, as we did our annual planning, and our reflection and aiming, it became clear that there was a space that wasn't being filled, that was this research and learning part of it, which was less about sociocracy and more about experiments, how to treat everything as an experiment. And I guess that's the overlap you're talking about, Roland, is that sort of heart work is the spirit of experimentation, but this is actually like, how do we make that alive in the group? Um, and it is, as the home of the research project, there's this interesting tension around, heart work is internal to the Lifeboat Guild or Lifeboat Academy, and outreach and network is external. Like there's a kind of a clear inside and outside. And I don't know where research and learning is. Is it right on the edge? Um, so these are all, I am legitimately curious about what shape this ends up taking. So back over to you, Pamela.
Well, I'm glad I let others go first because it helps me understand that my uncertainty is well founded, that it is something that's emerging. And um, my, I'm stoked by research learning simply because that is that's that really gets my interest immediately about what is being researched, what is being learned, and how is it being, etc. And it is so open-ended. And so part of me was wondering where my outreach things fit in this place, and whether or not that has a place within that general category of research learning. And when you mention experimentation, I'm thinking, okay, then it's landing a little bit more firmly. And of course, curiosity is just it's like the scent of a rose. You just want to get closer, you know. Curiosity just wants you to get closer to what is this scent that's arising. So I feel it's worth my while to learn about what is going on here, and see how I can occupy the space in a meaningful way.
Very cool. So I think we'll all find out together. Um, so the agenda item there basically are two agenda items that I put on the original email. One is to go over the driver statement. So what are the marching orders that we've gotten from the Stewardship Council, which includes some project priorities for this year. And then, so going over that, asking any questions, making any comments around that, and then actually starting to talk about, so what do we do with those kind of high level project priorities? Where do we start and where do we focus? Is there anything else that people would like on the agenda? Pamela, over to you.
Um, do you have a link that you could put in the chat to the document that you're talking about? I am still really slow in getting around Asana, and yeah, okay. Yeah, it's not funny. I don't, it's odd. I've not been able to really succeed in, okay, I'm just gonna open this up. Oh, I need access if you don't mind, yeah. But I see it here, so there's so I guess I'm interested. Whatever it is that I have in the back of my mind can wait. I would like to just carry on with what your agenda is, find out more about what you mean, what is embedded in the driver's statement, and find out more about the priority projects before inserting anything random. Roland, is it Roland? You're next.
Yeah. Agreed. I don't think there's anything pressing enough to add to the agenda on my part before going over the driver's statement and talking about priorities. So I don't want to add anything at this point. Back to you, Ben.
Cool. And of course, we are all circle keepers, and so as we can be fluid as things come up. And so just going over the driver statement, primary function. This still holds from the very beginning. We decided that in terms of treating the organization as an organism with organs, we are about the immune system and the regulatory system. So how do we manage that permeable membrane? So there's a focus on onboarding and effective decision-making and restorative practices. Again, this is evolving, so this may shift over time as we start to do more work. But then the update from this year's reflection process are really these points. I think when we talk about onboarding, it's really about onboarding the idea of we treat everything as an experiment, that kind of underlying concept. And in the particular, then it's about how we use experiments to get better at what we do. And in a way, then, like Roland was talking about, there's a lot of overlap between the guilds, and in some sense, the Curiosity Guild is a helper to all of the other guilds, because we want all of the guilds to run their own experiments. So we're really supporting the experiments as they happen in other places. So that might be an interesting challenge to see, like, what's ours and what belongs here and what belongs there. So those are kind of our primary functions. And then in terms of responsibilities, we've got onboarding, decision making, not that we make the decisions, but that we make sure that decisions are made in alignment with our values, clarifying and conducting experiments, and some conflict resolution, restorative practices when necessary. And as I'm saying it, that I'm also wondering, this sounds more like heart work, that last point. And then in terms of chores, in that spirit of experimentation, it's our job to guide the overall reflection process for the Lifeboat Academy. So our annual and seasonal planning, we take a lead in that. I don't think we really need to talk about the metrics right now. And likewise, in terms of the resources that are ours to play with, we have use of the space in the studio. It's our job to manage the help desk, and to the degree that the help desk remains useful or doesn't. Having when people schedule for office hours, that becomes part of our responsibility. Hosting webinars, planning, and then in some of those, basically some of the materials. So we're the keepers of the compass. And we are the ones who lead the navigating the attention sessions. And right, in terms of interdependencies, working with outreach around marketing, working with heart work around the studio and workshops and retreats, and then helping to coordinate badges. So those are the high points on what we're supposed to be doing. Let's do a round for responses, questions, concerns, observations. We'll do 2 rounds. We'll do one where you can just share your thoughts, and then we'll do another where we can weave together what we're hearing from others. So Pamela, over to you. You're muted.
I still find it a little hard to get a grasp of. And I'm thinking that will become more clear as I see how you proceed with these various things. And so I'm not going to ask for clarity or anything like that right now. I'm just going to be here and absorb what I can, and then when I have, that'll sift out my questions, sort of firm up what questions I do have. So Roland?
I was unmuted and I muted myself. A resource, I don't know if would it make sense to put in digital resources like Asana and Zoom and the Zoom account and such. I think that you were saying that the conflict resolution might be more hard work, but even just looking at where you are now with onboarding materials and navigating via tensions sessions, and the sociocracy resides with the Curiosity Club. It makes sense to me that conflict resolution would live here too, for that reason. Otherwise, everything looks good. Over to you, Ben.
Yeah, in terms of Asana and Zoom, we gave that to the coordination circle since everyone uses Zoom and everyone uses Asana. So just in terms of those digital resources, we put them at the coordination circle level.
Okay.
Um, and Pam, I share your kind of, as I was reading through this, it is interesting how the process works, and we haven't really come back to this since January. And even in that time, it's kind of like, oh, uh, I I wonder how this will shake out. So I think we're all sort of sharing that. And given our first round of comments, are we okay just moving on to the Roland, you're okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into what is it that we said we were going to do. Um, there are two parts to our action plan, the badges and the research project. And we were primarily responding to how we can support the other guilds. Um, and how can we, and how that was also one of the RFP questions, how can we advance the research project? Which is exploring effective ways of sharing lifeboat conversations more broadly, and how do we advance the learning opportunities and support the 2025 cohort, and deepen engagement and reciprocity more generally. and our two main things are basically to work on the badges and to advance the research project more deeply. And here's what we came up with for the badges, that we will establish a framework going back and forth with the guilds, but basically we're going to create the container that the other guilds can then pour their skills into. So we're thinking about the framework and they're thinking about the particulars. And then we'll help the guilds start to make the list of skills that they want included in the badges. And that we will then figure out how to manage that as a database so that it's accessible and findable so that people know what are the skills on offer. And then treating everything as an experiment. So once the guilds come up with their skills, then how do we actually run a small scale experiment where we are bringing some people earning some badges for, who's going to earn which badges and how will that actually work? And then after that is done, we'll debrief that experiment. So there's a lot of kind of back and forth between us and the other guilds. And then the research project, and this is also very much a moving target, what the research project is, but basically it's how does the Lifeboat Academy as a network engage with other networks who are also interested in resilience, and in a way that is actually, I think a better way of saying it is, and I'll use I language. I think the possibility of the badging system and a skills library is a potential connector across multiple networks, where I think there are a lot of portable skills that we are talking about in terms of how do you organize and engage people in your network. And so this model of having earnable badges and kind of a list of the skills that are represented in that network, I think it could be a way of weaving together different networks. So the mutual support, how can we support each other? What skills does your network have that are on offer? And what skills does this network have that are on offer? So I think that's kind of a way of describing maybe the most effective way I can describe it right now. And so as part of that we want to go and find other people who represent gatekeepers in other networks who might be interested in figuring out where there's this mutual benefit, and then figuring out how we work with them to bring people into that network, that skill sharing structure. And yeah, so that's part of the idea is encouraging people in their networks to do interviews with their members to identify skills and assets that would be on offer. And then what are we learning? And it's to interview members, the two sides of the coin. Where do you need support, and what supports can you offer? And basically creating a database where we can do some matchmaking around what do you need, and how can we connect needs and wants. Let me get down here, and that is at this point the high level plan on both of those things. So again, let's do I'm going to do a round: questions, concerns, observations. We'll probably do 2 rounds, and I'm just trying to figure out where to put notes. I'm going to put the notes in Asana, but I'll keep this screen up so that we can see the details here. So Pamela, over to you. Observations, concerns, questions.
I still want to just continue observing and listening. Roland?
I was actually wondering if going over the RFP is a way of looking at the how we've got the driver statement explained right now. Like as we're doing it, it will help us to figure out what the current wording ought to be to describe what the Curiosity Guild is all about. So, and so the research project is a means to connect with and make easier interconnections between organizations that are I guess it's organizations that are in themselves lifeboats without knowing they're lifeboats in the way that we're understanding lifeboats. So this is how I'm rewording my understanding of what the research project is, and that the badging is this, it's both for, from what you were proposing, is primarily was for the Lifeboat Academy, and that the Curiosity Club is tasked with developing a mapping system, I suppose, to help people place their skills in the development of badges. And then you were also proposing that there's something useful in that exercise in terms of this, the research project and this inter-organizational support system. So I'm paraphrasing to try to come to grips with what these, what this is and what these things are saying. So I pass back to you, Ben, to continue the circle.
I appreciate the paraphrasing. And And yeah, I think that's, I agree with that paraphrasing. Um, I, one of my Medium posts is about the parable of the caterpillar and the butterfly. And the way that my understanding, at least, of how that actually happens in the cocoon is the organs of the butterfly develop independently and then get stitched together. And so that, I think, is for me the kind of guiding metaphor. Is I think there's lots of people working on organs of the butterfly, and how do we stitch them together? So I I am proposing that one way that might happen is, well, and I actually thinking about the organs of the organism, right? Organs function interdependently. They receive things that they need, nutrients, resources from other organs, and they perform some sort of transformative work, and they pass resources on that are useful down the line to other organs. And I think that I'm hoping that talking about the badges or the Skillshare is a way of having that conversation about what what gets developed in one network that can get moved on to another network, and how do we even map those? I think that's, yeah, really it's about kind of what are mapping the resource flows that are possible between the networks that are part of the butterfly. Um, and I think in part it's the tool itself, but more importantly is the conversation around the tool. So yeah, I'm going to pass over to Pamela.
Yeah, this is interesting as a bridge to understanding, because I feel like since I haven't participated in the whole guild making process, there's a big gap there. And so one foot is sort of stuck in on the edge of a cliff, and the other part sort of falling. I'm not going to belabor a metaphor for this. Um, but when you talk about the um, imaginal process of the caterpillar butterfly, it helps me to visualize this process at the moment being very much like a bridge between the coming into being of this guild as a process that is, I guess they're the metaphor of, building the bridge as you're walking across, um, but also creating the conditions for it to continue in a direction that actually makes those links on the other side. Um, that's currently my sense making of this process, and it's serious work. Gonna need a lot of jokes for this one. It's good work, yeah. Roland.
Uh, I don't know if I have anything to add at this point. So I will pass.
So I'm trying to think of a joke involving a butterfly and a bridge. Two butterflies walk into a bar. Fill in the punchline. All right. Well, I think what I'm gonna propose is let's let's wade into the murkiness of the circle process. Where we are now is we've reviewed, actually, and here's what I'm going to do. I will stop sharing that screen and I will bring us back to the Asana. And so we debriefed a little bit the driver statement. So we've looked at the very high level abstract. So now the question is, what do we do? So what do we do with this? What's the work that this guild should start with? And we'll just do kind of gathering, let's do it gathering consideration style. So generally the rules there are, it's all good. So it can be a question, a comment, a suggestion, a hope, a fear, anything is good for sharing, but one item at a time so that we can layer, and we'll just do multiple circles and just layer in those items and see where it goes. So the question before us is really, where do we start? What's the first work that we should be focusing on? And you can always pass, and we'll just keep the circle going. So Pamela, over to you.
I'm going to pass.
Okay. So there are two categories. There's the two projects. And I'm thinking about resources, time, effort, and what do we feel that we can do. And I'm going to propose a chunk, not a full year, but think maybe, and I know that we do this elsewhere, and I'm proposing that we do here as well, think seasonally. So this would be for, well, I guess I'm going to propose that we consider this part of the spring season, since we're so close. Yeah. So one thing at a time, right? Right. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. Back to you, Ben.
I like that. I think that helps a lot. And yeah, well, and right. So I'm hearing two parts in what you said. One is we've got badges and the research project, and let's think about a chunk of a seasonal chunk. And I think the internal badges is the most logical place to start. It's the most immediate. And I think heart work is also the most logical partnership, because what we were doing in terms of the lessons learned, I think that identifying the skills is already happening. So I think an easy first step is really focusing on how do we work with heart work to develop those that first set of badges. Over to you, Pamela.
I'm going to pass, but first say that this is a really fascinating process to observe. And I'm glad to be here to do that. So I'm just going to say thank you. Roland?
Okie dokie. So badges and focusing on the internal, and we're creating a framework to pour in that effort. So I'm just repeating what we said before. This isn't my point. I still get my point. But in part it's to keep in mind, but also to think that the framework for the internal badge creation is also what's going to inform potentially badge creation or the badging system, as it could be useful for for the research project, for the organizational support network. So back to you, Ben.
I'm going to call it network of networks. Or yeah, so, and I'm liking that in terms of, I was just thinking about, we were, whatever, yesterday, we were brainstorming and thinking about the different skills. And so I'm thinking about what kinds of things were coming up there. And it feels useful to me to take a step back from the little post-its and to think in terms of, okay, how do those get organized? How does that get turned into something that's useful? So, it's that ability to sort of take off one hat and put on another hat. And likewise, so talking about bridging, we also then have the advantage of 1 foot internal and 1 foot external. So because it's to use that, it's like we while we are building the bridge across the chasm, actually, I guess that's it, isn't it? It's sort of like somehow we get to hop from one side of the chasm to the other and kind of go to the network of networks and start building back and start with the Lifeboat Academy and start building into the middle. And so a lot of the work then is making sure that we're not going to miss in the middle. As how do we adjust it so that we're going to hit in the middle point? Yeah, over to you, Pamela.
I'm going to put in a request for a concrete example. Over to you, Roland. No pressure.
Would you like to provide a
Yeah.
concrete example, Ben?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, in the network that we are talking to, one of the groups is the Community Justice Program here on Pender. And I'm a part of that group. And we are talking about the same thing. We need a skills inventory. And the Community Justice Program on the Southern Gulf Islands sees we are not about doing our J cases. We see ourselves as providing opportunities for people in the community to learn circle process and conflict resolution skills. So that what our kind of vision is that the circle process and these better collaborative skills are embedded in all of the organizations on the islands. So all of the community organizations have the ability to have good conversations about challenging topics. So we've already, on the CJ program, we've started talking about how to do circle. So how to, and based on the training that we've gotten from Evelyn Zellerer. So things like, how do you assess readiness? How do you do preparation? How do you do the circle? How do you do follow-up? And then, sort of steps in each of those. So the CJ group is talking about how do we want to talk about our skills. When we were talking yesterday in heart work, we were talking about a lot of the same skills. And a lot of those are going to be useful in any group anywhere. So even though we're developing them for ourselves, they might be useful to other groups. So the challenge of meeting in the middle is, like, for example, I think we take a more generic approach to how to do circle process. And the CJ group, because it's been trained by Evelyn Zellerer and she has a very fixed process, there is always an opening. The opening always includes this, this, and this. If you don't do those, it's not a circle. So for the CJ group, there's probably going to be a terminology, or there may be more tools or different tools in their kit than in our kit. But at the same time, there's going to be a lot of overlap. So is there a way, that's where I'm seeing the kind of connecting in the middle. We're both talking about the same tools. We don't want to have some sort of, I don't want to have a wordsmithing argument with every group about what do you call this? Or one of the other groups that I work with who I think could be part of the research project uses sociocracy, but they do some things very different. Like they have a rule that the facilitator can never go last in a circle, which I think is stupid. And so, but for them, it's a rule. And I don't want that to be a rule here. So how do we, that's a concrete example of the toolkit is largely the same stuff, but then how do we negotiate some of those finesse points? Is that a concrete enough example?
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, and it just makes a lot of different lights go on for over here. And I'm thinking of meeting agreements when you were talking about those yesterday as being, I guess, one of those central things when you're to bridge two different groups that might have slightly different agreements in their respective zones, but can make a collective agreement between them. Yeah, what a wonderful thing. But oh, that's so important. It's just so important.
Well, and mentioning agreements, I realized that we don't have agreements in this guild yet. And how would we want that to look to help us? And I'm curious about, are there agreements not only about how we are together, but also agreements to help us focus on the purpose of the guild? Just sort of like these reminders. And I don't know, this is really just curiosity. So Ben.
Your question highlighted my assumption. I make an assumption that the agreements that we use in the other guilds are kind of the generic starting agreements. And so, and I think it's a good point. We should talk about our agreements and, how do we want to work together in this guild? And maybe this is actually a model. Well, because it is one of the ideas that I don't understand it entirely. So if I get the details wrong, sue me, but it's really the metaphor that's important. There's a thing called GitHub, which is how, to my limited understanding, is how people who do open source programming share their bits of code with each other. And they do something called forking. And my understanding is you basically you post your code and anyone can use that code, but also anyone can take that code and make some minor adjustments, and that's called forking it. And it's sort of like, I think it lives in a nested hierarchy, so you can trace back the ancestry, the lineage of the code. And I think it's called forking because it can go this way and down and this way, so the one piece of code can get adapted to a couple more particular circumstances. So I think I'm like the agreements, I think is the standard agreements are the ancestor code. And then each of the groups can say, well, but we don't like this one and we want to add this one. And so there's a relationship, it's kind of based on that, but it's our own version. So it's also like a template where the template's a starting point, but it's not necessarily the finish point. But it makes it easier. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just start with the template. So, yeah, anyhow, so I'm going to put that in as I think that might be an element of this is sort of how do the tools get forked? Which I always think, anyhow, it just sounds so forking funny. So, over to you, Pamela.
Oh, well, that's really interesting because I guess I had made the assumption, and it's interesting that you make assumptions that the agreements were trans guild, and but that wasn't that was a false assumption. Roland didn't have that assumption, and so that clarification is a really important way of finding out that whole thing about forking and how it may be necessary for it's like an evolutionary pathway of in a different context there are different needs, and so you would have agreements that are tweaked according to whether it's different people who are occupying the space or a different goal or different work that needs to be done, and so it's like an adaptive feature, but you have your core structure that holds the whole thing together. It's like an ecosystem, I guess.
I pass.
Yeah, and I want to go back to um well, this idea of the agreements, if every group has its agreements, and then how to be, because this is not quite the same as forking when you have a meeting in the middle, but it reminds me of, and I would like to do some research. I only read a short bit on this, but apparently it was a very common practice in First Nations cultures, North American First Nations cultures, to you not only knew your protocol, but you knew your neighbor's protocols. And your neighbors knew their neighbors' protocols. And the way I read about it, the implication it in part it allows you to sort of translate, from one to the next, but it also was a a security feature, because if something happened in one of the communities where they lost their protocols, their neighbors knew them enough that they could help them recover them. So anyhow, I'm thinking about it sounds like this is kind of and I this is maybe 2 points, but in permaculture, the most interesting conditions are in the boundaries. You know, where two ecosystems come together, those boundary conditions are the most productive. And that feels relevant here. It's like you have your protocols, I have my protocols. The interesting thing is where those come up against each other. So yeah, over to you, Pam.
Yeah, redundancy. And yes, a similar understanding too that because the kinship networks were always extending outside of particular tribal boundaries, the boundaries are so different from how we consider them, and what constitutes the boundary of a tribe is not what we might necessarily think, and it would be so, again, context and group specific. But I guess one of the things that's important is to have a common understanding of that. Um, like to have a common understanding. Yeah, there are core agreements, and then there are these context variants.
Well, I think there's already built-in flexibility with the agreements, because as they already exist, we end with first of all, do you agree? Do you have any amendments or anything you want to add? So, you know, there's already, and it'd be, yeah. Anyway, I don't know if this is just detracting from the um yeah. Is this useful at this point? I feel like and I thought I was bring it up because we are at essentially at the moment of forming the guild. Like what's the guild? Not only what is it going to do, but what does it look like? Um, so uh back to you, Ben. I always feel like I'm on the Muppets when I say back to you, Ben.
I always think of it as like SNL, the news, and now sports. Um, yeah. Um, well, and I think it's a good question to bring us back to what is useful right now, and we're talking about where to start. And it, and so we're talking about agreements, and agreements are a core tool. So I think this is useful because we're really talking about what is that framework, and you could take agreements and you could put in, agenda setting or decision making, and it would still work because every group could have a different process for decision making. Some might just want to vote, and others use consent, and others use consensus. And um, and your ability to work together in groups, yeah, it's really about kind of, I'm just thinking about there's kind of a local version. I think we're talking about the framework, which is sort of allowing each group to have its local version. And then there's just the ability to kind of translate across groups. And more often than not, it's not even, um, I think my brain just kind of switched off, but it's not about the particular choices. It's about having a language to talk through the choices. It's sort of like if uh, I'll give an example. Like this is a concrete example, and it's one of the things that kind of bugged me when we were lurking, when I was in a group where we were talking about circle process. There was this big debate about whether or not we should go clockwise or counterclockwise, because some First Nations communities only ever go clockwise, some only ever go counterclockwise, some it's not something they even talk about. And because we settlers were using indigenous technology, we needed to respect it and do it the right way. I don't think it matters, right? If you want to go clockwise, I can go clockwise. You want to go counterclockwise, I can go counterclockwise. It's not that important to me. And it may be important to some people. So, it's sort of like being able to have the conversation. It's maybe yeah, no, this is for me, I don't care so much clockwise or counterclockwise, just let me know. Let me know which way you want to go. I can live with that. So it's not really so much about the particulars, about just being able to communicate. This is how we do things. Can you live with it? And then I think then this comes back to Roland's comment of as long as there's an understanding that we all get to live with it. So if someone says, here, I needed to go every other person by height, I can say I can't live with that, like that may be important for you. Can we find some compromise? Because that's just too confusing for me. So yeah, I think it's something about it's not getting fixated on the particulars, but being able to have the space where you can say what is the protocol here, and can you live with it? So I may be taking us away from usefulness. So I'm not sure. Um, and I'm not even sure what to note out of what I just said. I think there, I think there. I think that's my contribution. Over to you, Pamela.
Yeah, I have another thing that I've got to get off to after this, so I'm just anyway. Yes, and I feel caught up with the understanding that we've got around agreements right now, and I hear you, Roland, speaking about an interest in going into a different topic, and so I'm just going to pass over to you.
And in fact, I wanted to also do a time check that we're an hour in, and last meeting of the day of the week, etc.
For some of us, apparently.
Yes, right.
Don't rub it in.
Well, I am curious, and I would like to talk more, but I don't know if today is the right day, about the actual what does, and this is yeah, and this is where I feel like I'm a real learner here, at the knee of both Ben and April, who is not here. But how do you, one of our tasks is um, working out ways of measuring and tracking, and what does that actually look like, and how do you do it, and um, is it case by case, or is there a formula that we can just say, whatever you're doing, just use this? Yeah. And in terms of, so because we've talked about the badges in having something that where skills can be poured into, to be able to then rationalize them and then having develop a badging system. So that seems like a good place to start in terms of the sort of the how does this organism function? What are the organs, and how does the blood move around and all of that stuff? I wanted to use that instead of like how does this how does this mechanism function? I wanted something more alive. So I'm passing to Ben.
Well, and I think this is so my answer for measuring and tracking is it always depends, right? So what you measure and track depends on what you're trying to accomplish and your logic model. So the basic of a logic model is we think if we do X, it leads to Y, Y leads to Z, and Z is what we're trying to accomplish. And based on what you're doing and why, you put little indicators in that so you can see, and actually blood flow, that's a great thing, right? So if the way things work is the blood gets pumped into the lungs where it gets oxygenated, and then the oxygen flows to the cells where they use it for energy, and the waste then and the depleted oxygen or the depleted cell gets pumped by the heart back into the lungs. If there's an oxygen problem, you would want to say, you would want to measure the cells coming out of the lungs. Are they actually getting oxygenated? Or when it goes to the cells, are the cells taking on the oxygen? Or, you would want to track where it was relevant to, what you think is happening. So and this is it's always a discussion. It's a catchball because a lot of times you aren't sure how it works. So you put in some measures to see, well, what does happen here? When we do this, does this go up or down? And then once you know whether something goes up or down, then you can do the next thing. So the measuring and tracking is always should be actually it's your curiosity. What are you curious about? And you only want to track things that you're curious about. But you know how curiosity works, and you get curious about one thing, and then that connects to the next thing, and that connects to the next thing. So, and I think that's a really important thing to bring up. And I think we're at the end of time as well. So, I'm going to propose as a wrap up, we do any last thoughts for what we're doing here, the gathering considerations. And then we'll do a round around next, any ideas for next steps, which could be, let's let it sit until next time and we'll just come back to the conversation, but we'll gather any next steps and then we'll have last thoughts for the good of the cause. So hopefully it'll be 3 kind of quick rounds and then we can be on our way. So round number 1, any last thoughts for gathering considerations? Over to you, Pamela. And you're muted.
I love ending on a metabolic metaphor. And this has been, it's like I need to know more about the Lifeboat Academy. My research is appearing at this meeting, and I feel like I have learned a lot. And it's, yeah, so go from the metabolism. I like the way it ended up completely breaking the machine thing that you wanted to avoid, Roland, and got all networky and messy. So over you to Roland.
If I have anything to add, yeah, I don't know if yeah, I don't think I have anything to add. I think I just so to you, Ben.
Yeah, I feel like this is so I'm going to segue into next steps because I don't think I have anything to add. And I feel like the next step is really we just have to come back to this conversation. I suppose one of the things will be, so far I have been running with the research project as my own private little project. So there's going to be a transition of, me not just running off and doing it on my own. But in terms of concrete next steps, I already have some feeler email out to people that I think might be part of the research project and there's interest. So one of my next steps is I will follow up on that initial email. And I'll report back on what that is. of where things stand at the next meeting. And well, and the other next step that I would like to work on, and I think this can be, I don't think this should wait till the next meeting, or probably doesn't even happen in a meeting, is starting to think a little bit more about what that framework for the badges might look like. And there already are in this document, hang on. In the document, in the badges project document, there are already some more specific ideas about the framework. So I will, that's the other thing I'll do. I'll send around the proposal as it is formed right now. Because there is some meat on the bones in that proposal. So those are the two next steps that I can think of. And over to Pamela, are there any other next steps that are on your mind? And you're muted.
Curiosity. I just, and this doesn't need to be answered, but I just have I'm wondering whether or not the outreach to CHFBC is a potential next step that would qualify in this kind of research project.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm curious to see what bubbles up between now and the next meeting, and yeah, and I'm wondering about the format for the sharing of the research project. Yeah. So, to you, Ben.
You and me both. Yeah, and by the way, I just met right before this meeting with Ed and Michael, and it was a great meeting. And they're very interested, and so we've got next steps there. Yeah, and it is an interesting thing to think about. How does that fit here? Very good question. Okay, so I think we've got our next steps. I think we've had our conversation, and now it's just really a chance to close off in a good way. And so, last thoughts for the good, the cause, and a way to say goodbye. So, Pamela, over to you.
Oh, lifeboat, Roland.
Yeah, our meetings the last couple of days have been really enjoyable, and so thanks to you both. Over to you, Ben.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I was actually thinking at the beginning of the meeting, the land acknowledgement. Rolanda and I were talking this morning about uh, the value of frequent small meditations, 5 minutes every 2 hours, something like that, just to, especially with the craziness of the world and the general anxiety of everything. And our meetings work like that for me. The land acknowledgement and the grounding is like I get a little, it's actually part of my self-care to come to meetings. So that's
Or
a
the
weird
word,
thing to say. Isn't that cool?
or sad.
Anyhow, yeah, thanks everyone for being here, and onward and upward, and endure your next meeting and enjoy when you get free. And
Yeah.
I'll see you all
Thanks,
soon.
you guys. That was really awesome. Bye bye.
Bye bye.